All
All
right.
right. Well, hello, Dawn. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Well, let me introduce myself very quickly. I'm Mayra Tamayo, and I've been an English teacher for over 30 years. I've taught at every English level, and I'm currently a teacher trainer and a tutor. So I saw your content on Instagram, and I thought it was really interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So, my name is Dawn, and I am from Canada originally. And in Canada, I actually grew up in a very multicultural home. So, my mom is from the Philippines, my father is from Scotland, and I actually went to French school. So, I was very exposed to different languages as a small child. But nowadays, I live in Lima, Peru, because I am actually an archaeologist on top of my English business. And it is a huge passion of mine. And I love Latino culture. And so I've been living here for 6 years.
Amazing. And how was it that you actually started like, I'm gonna give learners of English tips to improve and get better?
Well, it actually kind of started when I was still in Canada, but then it really advanced once I moved to Lima. So in Canada, I knew that if I wanted to move to Peru, I need to make sure I can still make enough money to pay for my expenses. And I thought, okay, lots of people teach English, I'll do that. But I was teaching to like small children at the beginning, and once I made more and more Peruvian friends, then I noticed okay, when we're having conversations, and because we had conversations in English, I was speaking how I normally spoke to my friends at home. I was speaking like with all of my expressions, all of my phrasal verbs, and I actually did not understand why they did not understand me sometimes because I thought, well, you speak English just fine. Why don't you know how to use like come across or run out of or like those types of things? And then I'm like, oh, it's because those are all phrasal verbs. And so then that's when I started reverse engineering and thought this
Mhm.
would be really great content to actually teach people who are at an intermediate level and who just want to like be able to speak without fear and be able to speak like a native English speaker if they want to. So that's where it kind of started.
Well, that's actually great. And I'm glad that you talked about like reverse engineering and you have to step back a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and I find that at intermediate levels, it's really hard for students to get to an advanced level. They feel like they're stuck there. And what I
Hmm.
mention students is that because they are intermediate, they sometimes get these bad habits. And it's hard for as a
Hmm.
teacher or a tutor, we have to like polish and correct those bad habits and fill in the
Yeah.
gaps that they might have. So their impression of not making any progress is not real because they are
Mhm.
progressing, but it is a lot of correcting and polishing before they can actually make that leap. And it could take a little bit longer than a student who is beginning with a blank canvas and beginning, from zero at an A1 level.
Yeah.
Their progress from A1 to B1 is very fast, but
Yeah.
from B1 to C1, it is a lot slower. What has your
Yes.
experience been there?
It's been the same. And I also have personally experienced this learning Spanish
Mm.
and learning French also. And so I use a lot of my personal experiences to my teaching
Mhm.
because I understand that I until now, I still have lots of bad habits in Spanish. Like I always want to say, como así? And my Spanish teacher is like, no, it's just así. And so I take what I have learned in my own experience and then I try to give the right information to help people recognize because they don't recognize their habits, their bad habits, unless they have somebody correcting them. And that is kind of like the first thing is just self-awareness. And a lot of people, they get really, like in my experience, a lot of my students, they get embarrassed.
Mhm.
They're like, well, I'm intermediate. I don't want to relearn like present perfect. I don't want to have to relearn everything I should have known in basic levels. And it's kind of like, well, you have to be able to advance more. And I think that's where people get stuck because they're like, well, it's like a mental block. Like, I don't know how I'm going to push through this without just having to practice and practice and practice and being corrected. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yes, definitely. What do you think or find is the best technique or methodology to actually make that transition?
It really comes down to more self awareness and understanding passive versus active learning. Because a lot of people, especially the people who say, well, I understand English just fine, but why can't I speak it?
Uh-huh. Mhm.
Well, it's because you passively understand everything. You're passively listening. Maybe they're listening to something on TV in the background. Maybe they're just going through Instagram and seeing things in English and they're like, yeah, I understand it. But they're not actively looking at that content and picking it apart. They're
Mhm.
not actively looking at, oh, this is a phrasal verb, or oh, this is how they use have and has in a sentence. That is active listening. And so I think that if people were to focus on the active learning portion more, they would be able to advance much quicker.
Yes, I totally agree. And reading could have
Mhm.
different, or listening could have different
Yeah.
intentions, like you say. You can
Yeah.
just read or listen to understand the main idea, and that's why they say, well, I understand what it was about. But
Yeah.
when you actually take time, even with like a movie, or the lyrics of a song, and you pay attention to patterns and word order and verb tenses, that is where
Yeah.
you start understanding the use of the language. And it
Yeah.
actually serves as a model for you, because we learn through imitation. And
Yes.
it'll help us to understand why we don't use like to for everything, or
Yeah.
the for everything. Um, and sometimes it's omitted, and those little like rules that in their first language, especially if it's Spanish, they do
Yeah.
use the article in everything.
Right.
Or
Yes.
so I like that part. I agree totally with active
Hmm.
learning. It's key. And
Hmm.
just getting out and using it, not being afraid. I
Exactly.
always give an example. I'm glad that you were talking about learning Spanish and French, because
Yeah.
in Latin American countries, we have a lot of tourism. So
Hmm.
it's very common to have a foreigner speaking in Spanish, in this case,
Yes.
and they're not afraid to speak in Spanish, and they have mistakes, and they have the word order completely
Yes.
backwards, or they don't conjugate the verbs correctly, but they're not afraid to speak, and they just
Yes.
do it.
Yes.
And they always say, why aren't they afraid? And it's just that. It's just when you really want to communicate and you have the need or the pleasure of learning the
Mhm.
language, you're not worried about, oh, wait, the verb has to go first, or the adjective is after and or before. And I find that many of English learners, what hinders their fluency is
Mhm.
precisely that they spend too much time worrying about grammar.
Yes. That is true.
Right?
Very true.
How
Yeah.
can you, what tips would you give those students?
I would honestly tell them to make speaking a part of their everyday. Find a buddy. And there's a lot of people completely overlook the internet when it comes to speaking languages because you can easily go on websites such as Hello Talk, Episodin, and like there's various other like language exchange apps where you can find a friend online who is a native speaker in English and talk to them for free.
Wow, I didn't know that. Can you
Oh
repeat
yeah.
those two sites?
Yeah. Hello Talk and Episodin.
Excellent.
And so, yeah, I can send you the links later, but so many out there. Like, and even just if you just Google language exchange,
Okay.
then you'll find lots of them. And I even found some friends in Peru through language exchange websites. One of my good friends, like I just had dinner with her last night, and we were talking about how crazy it is that now I can speak Spanish fluently with her. And we met 6 years ago, and we're still good friends. So,
Yeah,
yeah, of course, lots of resources on the internet to be able to speak
exactly.
every day. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Another thing is, what about vocabulary? Another thing that I feel students struggle with is how do I increase the range of vocabulary because they tend to use the same words all the time, or because
Mhm.
they're working, they know that jargon, they know the terminology, but it's just limited to that.
Mhm. Well, there's a few things that could work, and it really depends on how they like to learn. For myself, I love to learn with flashcards. I
Mm.
love flashcards. And there's actually an amazing app called Quizlet where you can actually create flashcards on your phone. And so when you're like on the bus, if you're walking somewhere, you're at the park and you have 10 minutes, then you can just quickly access your flashcards and just practice right there,
Mhm.
vocabulary words. So lots of tools like that are very useful for people who like to use tools. But one thing that I really like to use, and I've been forcing my students to do recently, is consider vocabulary words as learning a name of somebody new. So if you're at a party, you meet somebody for the first time and they introduce themselves, they say their name. And one thing that salespeople do all the time in sales is when they meet somebody new, they try to remember their name through various different actions. And a lot of times they will immediately say, "Oh, hey, Victor, how are you? Oh, I know a Victor. Oh, Victor, would you like to go over here?" So they start immediately using that person's name in various sentences. And the next time they see them, they remember immediately, like
Mhm.
that is Victor, because they're applying it immediately.
Mhm.
And so you can do the same thing in English. Apply new vocabulary words immediately when you learn them, because then you absorb it better. Because if there's like phrasal verbs, this works really well with phrasal verbs. If there's a phrasal verb that you learn, like run by, okay, then how can you use run by in 3 sentences right now? Because the next time you actually maybe want to use it, you feel more comfortable already than if you just looked at it and brushed past it. And so that is one technique that I highly encourage and force all of my students to do all the time.
I love it. Something that I use and I recommend is you using the thesaurus.
Oh, yes.
Um, because a lot of students tend to want to know the definition and meaning of every word that they
Yes,
read or they hear or they see. And what does it mean? Okay, well, we have to look at the context.
yes,
And deducing meaning through context is not always easy. So
yeah,
instead of going to the dictionary, I recommend going to the thesaurus, looking for words that you recognize,
yeah,
and because the thesaurus gives you a range of options, depending of the context, you can say, oh, okay, now I know what it means.
yeah,
If they write them down in their notebook, that is another way that they could also begin expanding their vocabulary.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I recommend going to the antonyms because if you
Mhm.
know the similar meaning, but if you understand the opposite, it'll help you understand what that word means instead of just a definition. Because I don't know if it's, I'm just giving an example. If the word is actor and you look it up in the dictionary and it says a person who acts, but you don't know what acts means, you have to go look up the word acts.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you go to the thesaurus and you see synonyms and you're like, oh, I understand what this means, then
Right.
it's easier to understand. But
Yeah.
precisely using it immediately is
Mhm.
key, because then you're just acquiring knowledge, but you're not actually learning, which is actually the difference between knowledge and learning, right?
Yeah.
You
Exactly.
won't learn unless you use it, unless you apply it,
Yeah.
because they
Exactly.
are skills and you have to put them to use immediately.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly.
What about for someone who is a teacher? I have a lot of English teachers here in
Uh-huh.
Mexico that
Okay.
are B1, B2,
Okay.
but are wanting and needing to be a C1,
But they're already English
but
teachers.
they're already English teachers.
Oh, interesting. Well, in that case, I would highly recommend that they have an English buddy that they talk to every single day. The one thing that I really notice, especially with people who feel confident in English already, maybe enough to teach, but they still have mistakes for themselves, is they need to master their grammar first, but really make sure they have the foundation solid. And one way to do this is to either do like a placement test online, doing a grammar quiz, and really be honest with themselves of like, oh, actually, I don't really know what the difference is between do's and does. Because a lot of people, especially Spanish speakers, always confuse do and does and has and have. And so when if they're honest with themselves of like, okay, I actually don't know how to do this, okay, go back to the drawing board, relearn that lesson, make sure you have a solid foundation of that grammar level. And then from there, if they want to improve even more to get to that C1 level, then they should be starting to incorporate phrasal verbs, idioms, other type of colloquials, because that is how native English speakers speak.
Mhm.
And every time I go back to Canada, like I go back 3 times a year. And every time I'm there, I'm with my friends and I'm talking, I start counting like on average, like how many phrasal verbs am I using in a conversation? And on average, I use at least 100 every single day if I'm just talking. And so those are really important
Mhm.
for people who are even just teaching English for a basic level right now to be able to incorporate to get
Mhm.
to C1, C2. And it's going to make them feel more confident in English and confident speaking more casually, which is really important too.
Mhm.
But yeah, as long as they completely fix their grammar, make sure they get rid of their bad habits, start adding those expressions, they're already going to advance their level so much more.
Mhm.
And also making sure they have an English buddy that is a native English speaker. That's always really helpful. And again, they can find them online somewhere.
Yeah.
And having those three elements will already elevate their English so
Mhm.
much.
I totally agree. Welcome, Lisana. Welcome, Ruth. Lisana, would you do, or Ruth, do you have any questions for us or any comments as teachers or learners of English? What have been your challenges? What would you like for us to help you with?
Isana here. Right now, I'm currently at the office, so I'm just I want to hear as much as possible. My boss is not yet here, so I'm this is why I'm taking advantage of this of the mic. Well, yeah. So I like it so far because I want to make sure that what I was doing was correct. So I this meeting the that you guys are doing is helping a lot. There's a lot of things that I need to work on. When because I had a student who was transitioning from A to B1, and I know that they were techniques that I was still missing. And for that class specifically, I had to study, for example, 2 or 3 hours to give a 1 hour class.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I understand that I need to get certified. But that was a big challenge for me. Also, I was learning a lot because that student, she already knew all the rules. She went to Berlitz school. She went to some other English institution to learn language institutions to learn English. So she already knew the rules. She didn't know how to apply them. So we were using vocabulary, and she was really. I'm sorry, we were using conversation the first 30 minutes of the class, and then we were talking about rules, some grammar rules or topics like such as phrasal verbs, linking words, etc. And then at the second class we were practicing those rules and so on and so on. So the good thing, she's not, yesterday she just told me that she wasn't able to take classes anymore because she has some other projects. But that really got into, like, I asked her for a feedback. I wanted to know how, as a student, she's perceiving my class and what can I be able to do to improve myself as a teacher. And but I haven't got her message back. But yet this is so helpful, and I really thank Mayra, and thank you, Ms. Brookes, for this opportunity. So I'm still hearing, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thank
sharing, Ms.
you.
Thank you.
Ruth, what has your experience been learning English, and what is your goal, or what would you like us to help you with?
She left a message.
Okay. Do you understand what she wrote in the chat? Because it's in Spanish. I can put it a little bit right now. Well, she's just listening right now. But understanding, I think, okay, in writing, what about in writing? How can we help students improve their writing skills to get from B1 to C1?
Well, it all comes down to the basics, which is practice, lots of practice. And I think one thing that's really fun, and I do this all the time for both French and Spanish, is I like write in my journal like I would for anything. Like if I want to talk about my day, like, today I'm feeling like this and this and this, I would write it in French or I'd write it in Spanish. Or if I'm like, well, I don't know what to write about, there's like, you can find so many writing prompts. Like if you just Google some writing prompts, then it will give you a bunch of ideas of what to write. Like maybe it will say, talk about your favorite memory as a child, or talk about the best day of your life, or talk about when you met your best friend. Like little writing ideas. So then you feel excited to write. And that's one thing that a lot of people, like, I think where maybe teachers go wrong or even just learners go wrong is they don't know how to apply it to make it entertaining for themselves or for the student. And so you have to find ways to make it entertaining. And so to practice writing, find things that you want to write about. Like, don't just write about something that's boring or like that you're not interested in. If you love to talk about archaeology, like I do, then okay, I'm going to write about archaeology in French right now. I'm going to write about it in Spanish just so I can practice, because if it's a topic that really gets you excited and then in a moment when you're writing, you think, oh, actually, I don't know how to use that word or how to apply that word or how do I put this in a correct sentence, it makes you think more because you actually want to know how to use it. Whereas if it was more of a boring topic, then you just kind of brush it away.
Yeah. And a lot of students are like writing, oh no, writing, and they dread writing. But I actually feel that it's easier to start writing than to start speaking, because you have more time to order your ideas, your thoughts, and you can go back and make corrections. Whereas in speaking, you don't have that. that
Exactly.
opportunity, because unless you're like constantly correcting yourself and saying, I mean, but
Yes.
in writing, you do have that opportunity and you
Yeah.
can check or proofread what you wrote and then substitute with those words that, again, that if you look in the thesaurus for other ways to say the same thing, or if you
Yeah.
rephrase it, or if you paraphrase, or if you summarize, those are all different ways that students can also continue developing their skills and
Hmm.
learning to use, again, what you said about active learning and active like listening or reading is
Hmm.
while you're reading, look at how the author uses connectors or punctuation marks
Yeah.
or how they describe things, because maybe you don't know how to say the word or write, like if you're, I don't know that word, even if you're
Yeah.
in writing, but you can describe it. So even
Yeah.
if you go around it, it'll help you or any
Hmm.
student who wants to get precisely from B1 to C1 or just improve at any level that they might be at, because
Yeah.
the thing is just getting started. And a
Yeah.
website that I recommend, and I actually recommended it just a few days ago, is Write and Improve. It's
Okay.
called writeandimprove.com. And you can select your proficiency level, and
Hmm.
it has writing prompts. You
Nice.
write it, and it tells you where you're at in a proficiency level. It keeps a history and it graphs your progress. And you can edit, there's no limit of how many times you can edit it. And it tells you with colors, or sometimes it literally says wrong spelling, or maybe this is not the right word that you want. And
Mm.
here it challenges you to really think about, okay, why is it wrong? What if I change this? And what if maybe I'm missing a punctuation mark, or maybe it's
Yeah.
the wrong tense, or it's not subject, there's no subject verb agreement. So
Yeah.
that website really, for visual learners, it helps them to self-evaluate and through artificial intelligence say, okay, I'm progressing, or no, every time I make a correction, I'm lowering my proficiency level. So what do I have to do? And that's when we as tutors can come in, or teachers, and
Hmm.
say, okay, this is how you can say it, or I recommend
Yeah.
this. But having that, I think that having a model, again, because we learn through imitation, if you read something and you analyze it, like you
Hmm.
said, with actively paying attention, you can say, okay, now I see where my mistake is. Now I see that I have to use this or that, and it will really help them achieve their goal.
Yeah.
Journaling, yes, journaling, Ruth, is a marvelous way to also keep track of your progress. You will notice when you start
Hmm.
journaling how you began writing. And maybe at the beginning, you just write, my day was fun.
Yeah.
And then the next day, I had a lot of fun. And then suddenly it's like, oh, today was an amazing day because blah, 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 blah. And
Yes.
but the thing is just to, just start. Just
Yes.
or anything else? I know that you have to go, Dawn. I know you have something else to do, but is there anything else that you would like any learner of English or a teacher or anyone listening to like have a tip on how they can get from B1 to C1?
I would definitely say, aside from focus on the active learning of side of things, in addition to that, constantly be asking yourself why. Like, why is it the way this is? Or why am I choosing to use this word? Like, why are they saying it like this? Because the more you question things instead of just accept and move on, The more you question things, it makes you absorb things so much faster. And another thing that I would say is to really make your own immersion. And what I mean by that, and this is what I teach a lot of my students too, is like if you cannot physically go to Canada or to the United States and live an immersed life in an English speaking country, you can replicate it in your own home. So, for example, you can change all the settings on all of your devices to English. Your phone, your Netflix, your computer, anything you use, you can change it to English. Anytime you have to speak, maybe just speak in English.
Mhm.
Anytime you have to communicate, do it in English. Every time you have to think about something like, what am I doing today? Okay, think of it in English. Like the more you're actively forcing yourself to immerse in it, it's going to make it so much easier, even though it feels really uncomfortable at first.
Uh-huh.
And I say this from experience because I've been speaking French since I was 5 years old. But that does not mean in my adult life that I'm using it every day now. But I do have some French colleagues who only speak French and Spanish, but I prefer to speak to them in French. And what do I do before I see them? Literally, like not even 1 week in advance, but maybe a few days in advance, my entire home is French. I'm only reading French books. I am watching a French show. If I'm watching a French show, and it's like about an opinion or something, or they're talking about something, I always ask myself, how would I respond in French? Because then I'm asking myself, why, but also how. And then I feel like I flip the switch again and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm confident again. I can talk to them just fine. So definitely immersing in all the possible ways you can at home because it is possible, but then also making sure you're always asking why and how.
I love
And it's gonna
that. That's a
help.
great recommendation. Well, thank you. Can you put in the chat again the two websites
Yes,
that you recommended
yes.
at the beginning of the session? And while you're doing that, thank you again, Dawn, for your time.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
it was great meeting you, and thank you, Lisana and Ruth, for being here also with us. And we'll be sharing this recording with everyone. Okay,
Amazing.
we'll be in touch then. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thanks to you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.